If you want to have a deep conversation with another human being, it will never be enough to use superficial body language techniques, such as gaze them deeply into their eyes or assume a specific body posture. Nor will it be sufficient to use specific vocabulary or use I statements. What is really necessary is to adopt certain feeling or awareness states, embody certain energies, follow certain principles out of which you converse with another human being. People are learning a lot these days, and they're learning a lot about sensitivity, and many people are becoming more and more perceptive. They're learning to recognize sincerity versus insincerity, albeit energetically. Sometimes we cannot really put that into language, but we know it deep down that someone is not being authentic or sincere. Therefore, if we want to have a deep conversation with someone, we need to create a connection with them where they feel safe to share and express their innermost truth. And we need to also be able to do that ourselves. Now I'm going to talk to you about certain feeling states that I want you to practice and create in your immediate experience. I have worked out that these feeling states are the most beneficial if you want to have a deep conversation with someone. So the first and the most important fundamental feeling state you want to create is the state of total openness and not knowing. How often, just be honest, when you're talking with someone and they're saying something to you, how often do you think in your mind what you want to say in response to them? How often do you just wander off or try to create a humorous or funny response or clever response so that they see you as intelligent? Or how often do you just know? You just presume that you know what they're saying to you, just because you speak the same language and technically you understand the words that they're saying. They're just saying something, and you kind of place them into a certain category. And coming from that category, it's as if you can predict what they will say next or what their experience is. We do this mental trickery with each other all the time, don't we? But this is exactly something that I'm going to ask you to drop for the purpose of this exercise. Simply enter a conversation from a state of deep not knowing what that other person is going to communicate to you, what they're going to say, what they should be saying. Just let that go. Be present and simply be there for the other. Your only purpose in the conversation is going to be to grasp their experience as accurately as it is for them, as if to join them in living through that experience, living it with them. It's not your job to judge or make assumptions as to the validity of their experience or their worth based on that experience or the worth of that very experience. No. Your goal is to open up and to just trust that the response will arise. The response will arise out of the state of openness when your turn comes in this conversation. I want to relate a little personal example. I remember when I was a little girl, I fell in love with autumn, and I remember a very specific feeling that autumn would ignite in me. And I remember communicating that specific feeling that autumn would evoke in me to my mother one day. And I was really surprised to discover that my mother did not have that specific perception of autumn that I did. It was a huge discovery to me because I used to think that everybody experiences autumn in the same way, with the appreciation of its impermanence, the appreciation of the beauty of the colors, the poetry and nostalgia. Yes, my mother could definitely relate to that, but in her own unique way. By extrapolation, we can say that everybody's perception of something shared is unique. And when we are having a communication, a conversation, our goal is to hear what the other's perception of something is. Also notice when you're having a conversation, how often do you judge that other person's perception as inferior to yours? Or perhaps you do it the other way around. Maybe you perceive them as an authority and you're looking for validation from them when it comes to your perspective. But in this particular situation, just notice, sometimes those of us especially who do self-development, sometimes we kind of see the other person as yet to become. We see their potential, but we don't hear them at the moment when they're actually sharing something. And that sharing goes unnoticed, and that person leaves the conversation unheard. Notice if you ever do this subtle trickery with the other person when you're waiting for them to come and join you on your level of spiritual or intellectual development, instead of just hearing what they have to say at this current moment. This open hearing can only happen from a place where we're not expecting that other person to say something particular or show up in a particular way for us or describe their experiences in a particular way. Here is an attitude that I want you to practice during your next conversation. Mentally get into the state where you're meeting the other person where they're at. You're not expecting them to talk about certain things, and while they're talking, it's as if you're mentally channeling this energy to them. I don't expect you to frame your experience in a certain way. I don't assume that I understand your experience just because I understand the language that you speak it in. I allow you to be the arbiter of what you want to say to me. I'm not trying to gain the upper hand by showing you how to think about your experience in any way. I just want to hear and grasp what you have to say, because your experience is unique, and I don't pretend, and I don't want to pretend, as if I can understand it as fully as you do. Now we're coming to the second point in how to have a deep conversation, and it has to do with listening. Listening when your sole purpose is to grasp their unique experience. You're not trying to embellish their experience with what you think about it or how you want it to be. You're not guessing. You're just trying to reconstruct their experience from what they're sharing. And you hold it as ultimately unique. You are seeking to just grasp it. It's a very special feeling when you grasp what someone is saying to you. Even right now, when I'm describing something, there might be a subtle assumption in the background on your end that you understand what I'm saying because we speak English, I assume, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video up until this moment. But what am I really saying? Can you hear what I'm saying? When you're speaking with someone, notice how there is this assumption running in the background that it's kind of, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying, okay. But are you really? Ask clarifying and specifying questions, such as, what do you mean by that? Or restate what they just said in your own words, and let them be the arbiter of whether you grasped it correctly or not. And the third point in a deep conversation is this: be as truthful as you can when you're sharing your own experience. It doesn't matter if tomorrow you will reconsider what you shared and want to share it in different flavors and colors. Today, you are at a specific depth of understanding of that experience that you want to share. And at each given moment, you're making a commitment to coming from that specific depth that you have at this given moment. Do your best to do so. Don't worry if tomorrow you will change your mind. It's okay. Everything is in flux. Everything is changing, and so are our ways of thinking about our experiences. This is the 4th time I am filming this video, and every time I notice I'm adding something new to this, because I feel my depth is infinitely growing, the depth of what I understand about this subject matter. It applies to everything. So just try to use as accurate vocabulary as you can, as precise vocabulary as you can, as unpretentious vocabulary as you can. Don't simplify it too much either. I notice there is this trend in our society towards simplification these days. But I feel what is missed when we oversimplify things is the nuance, the subtlety, the complexity of what we're talking about. Some things just cannot be simplified. They can't. They require a prior understanding, a deep understanding of certain things. So keep that balance in mind and try to find it at every given moment. You'll be so much better at finding this balance if your awareness is open, if you're open towards what is actually happening, not what you're thinking about it in your fantasy land. And finally, let me leave you with this final little tip that you can implement in the next conversation you have. When you're talking about something, single out that domain that you are talking about and ask your friend or the other person, but what is this thing in and of itself really? For example, the other day I was in the kitchen talking with my friend about politics over coffee. And at some point I really felt like asking her, but what do you think politics is about? Not Ukrainian politics or American politics or the politics globally, but just politics. What is that about? Sometimes we think, or at least I do, that we mean the same thing when we're using the same words, but nothing can be further from the truth. Actually, sometimes when we're using one word such as Christianity or logic or mathematics or language or even I, we refer to very different things. Therefore, it might be very deepening and empowering for both of us or for all of us to define our terminology and to discuss what we mean when we use these terms. Just try doing so. Notice how it will remove the charge of the conversation and bring it into a more existential domain. And the quality of the thoughts that may arise will be imbued with novelty. It will be more interesting, and you will become more objective and, dare I say, more selfless when discussing that. And that will help you build connection with the other person. I find that this existential kind of communication is very rare between people these days, but I really feel that if we want to be contributors of peace in the world, it's necessary that we learn to communicate about existential matters. Beware that you're not teaching existential thinking to the other person explicitly by inferiorizing them, by playing a guru. I'm not trying to play a guru with you too. I hope you can feel that, although I recognize that it may sound like that to some of you, but I hope it doesn't. My goal here is to share some of my deepest findings about the nature of communication, which is deep, enlightening, empowering, thought-provoking, not black and white, with respect for nuance, communication that leads to self-development of every one of us. And I just want to thank you from the core of my being for your courage to try out this new communication style whenever you can, with your friends, partner or partners, with your family, at work and at home, and even with yourself. When you're communicating with yourself, see if you can hear yourself truly. Not imagining what you should be saying, but actually hearing what you have to say. Thank you. Bye-bye.